Hey, how's everybody doing? It's me and Barry back at you. And I say Barry, I should say in quotes, because it's never conclusively been proven that he's not, in fact, DB Cooper. But for now, we'll just go by his request and call him Barry. How you been, Barry?
Good. How you doing, man?
Good. So I was thinking about, you know, that I used to go to live music all the time. I mean, like when, as I've mentioned before, when Kim and I were together and first moved to Austin, we might go to 3 shows a week. I mean, we were going that often. And South by Southwest was an annual thing. Even ACL Fest was an annual thing. Jazz Fest when we lived in New Orleans, and we went to shows as much in New Orleans as we did here in Austin. And I don't go to shows anymore. I really don't. And it's a combination of things. And I was just wondering how it is for you. So for me, like since Kim and I broke up, I don't have that concert buddy to go to shows with. And it's not that I wouldn't go to shows alone, I will, but it's just definitely not as enjoyable. And then there was COVID. And that definitely, I obviously, like, I've not stopped seeing shows entirely for a long period of time. And that sort of got me out of that loop as well. And then and then it's also, I was thinking about it, like the bands I used to really like, I think a lot of the bands I liked sort of either stopped playing or like stopped making music I liked, and there weren't new bands that replaced them. And then in some cases, and I know this is going to sound weird, but the bands got too old for me. Like when I see X now, like they used to look so old that it's sort of like a mirror to my own mortality. And like it's okay if Dylan looks old, that's fine. That like Dylan was always old, like, and it's okay if the Stones are old, but when X is that old, it's just weird. And so there's just so many reasons why I don't go to shows anymore. I know you don't go a lot, but you certainly go more than I do. But what's your take on all of that?
So before we touch on that,
Mm.
um, and before it disappears into the ether, um, when we do these recordings, we the show or whatever you want to call it ends
The
like
big show.
mid sentence usually
Yes.
because we
Yes.
don't time it and
Yep.
it's
Unscripted.
it's
Yep.
yeah. So um, I think a lot of times when one of us is cut off right at the end of a episode, um, we forget to circle back to finish that thought. So I want to go back
Well,
and
especially
finish.
if it was dismissive of me.
Well, no matter what it was, it
Okay.
just seems like um,
Yep.
it's almost left off like a cliffhanger. And the last one was we were talking about Mike Bloomfield,
Oh yeah.
and it cut out right in the middle of me talking about how I respect him, but he's not one of my favorite guitarists, and his playing doesn't really move me that much compared to somebody like and then it cut off. So who I was talking about John somebody like John Lee Hooker, who is certainly not the same caliber technically as a Mike Bloomfield. But his playing, and just usually when it's just him by himself or with very sparse backing, that moves me 100 times more than some virtuoso guitarist who's playing a million notes per minute and is technically brilliant and can do all these things, lots of fireworks. But oftentimes I find that sort of thing somewhat soulless. And I'm not saying that necessarily about Mike Bloomfield, but people like Steve Vai or Yngwie Malmsteen or oh God,
Eric Johnson.
yeah, stuff like that,
Mm.
where there's a real fan base for that sort of
Yep.
stuff, and it's usually guitarists, the type of guitarists who are hanging out at Guitar Center all day, wanking to prove their brilliance to the
Yeah.
other wankers in Guitar Center. But anyway, I just wanted to finish that point before addressing what you just talked about, which I think is a good topic, by the
It,
way.
and so it's interesting though what you just said, because I did think about it after we last talked, and I was wondering whether when you said, well, you prefer John Lee Hooker, and I was wondering whether that was like if race had anything to do with that. Of
Oh
like,
no, not
okay,
at all.
okay, not
Not at
like
all.
he's black, so he's real, okay.
No,
Um,
because to the same somebody who moves me in the same way, but you wouldn't qualify as a black guy is
yeah,
the Edge from U2,
okay.
like their early records, and he's certainly nobody would consider him a guitar virtuoso or like a technical master, but his guitar playing moved the hell out of me and still does on those first handful of U2 records. And you know, another person I'd throw into that category is Peter Buck on the first handful of REM records.
Eh,
So no, race definitely has
Okay.
nothing to do with it.
And then my only other question would be, and I get your point, and I agree with you about those other guitarists. By the way, I feel the exact same way. Although I will say, like, I remember my brother and I were checking out. He was looking to get some new stereo equipment, and we were at some high end store, and like. And they put on stuff, and it was ridiculous, like how expensive the speakers were, like $50,000. I mean, it was like that high end. It was crazy. But they
So
put on,
so you got four of them.
yeah, exactly. I bring them with me everywhere I go. They put on Righteous by Eric Johnson, and I will say, like, with that sort of sound system and all, and and again, I can't listen to that a lot because it doesn't do it for me. But it's not that I couldn't recognize, like, wow, this really does sound amazing, like for that moment.
Mhm.
But it's also interesting that one of your favorite bands, correct me if I'm wrong, is Led Zeppelin,
Absolutely.
and Jimmy Page would be considered a guitar virtuoso.
I think so, but I feel like somebody like Jimmy, his playing, I don't know, it's it's hard to even um describe the difference that there is between somebody like Jimmy Page and, like, let's just use Yngwie Malmsteen as the comparison. Um, to me, Jimmy's playing, even though it's somewhat you know, he's somewhat of a virtuoso. It has such soul to it as well, that I don't find in some of the more wanky stuff. I'm trying to think of some other examples,
Well, it
but it has such a soul to it. His solos are so well crafted, and they're not just like a million notes a minute. There's something about them that makes them super catchy, and they just, you know, when Jimmy is, you know, doing his thing, um, you know, after hearing them 1,000 times, they still give me goosebumps. As overplayed as a song like Stairway to Heaven is, the solo in that towards the end of the song when the whole band kicks in, man, I mean, rock music doesn't get much better than that, you
and
know?
I really like Page as well. My issue with him is when his over the top stuff, like when he's using a violin bow on his double guitar, and I'm like, oh come on, like that's when I'm like, okay, like next,
Sometimes live he could get a little wanky.
yeah.
I've got a lot of live Zeppelin stuff that loses me a bit here and there, and there's a couple of like these box sets that came out over the last 20 years of live Zeppelin stuff, and it's not as concise and as constructed as the stuff they did on record, obviously.
Yeah.
And yeah, that loses me a little bit, but their records, I never find him wanky at all, and I find his playing just brilliant, almost exclusively.
And I had a bootleg or two from a really interesting time for them. Actually, it was right after the Yardbirds broke up, and like Zeppelin wasn't even like one of the bootlegs was called the New Yardbirds because
Yeah,
they hadn't
well,
even like
they were called the New
yeah, yeah.
Yardbirds at first.
Yeah, and so it was during that time, and it's really interesting. It was fascinating, like historically, to like to track like Yardbirds ending the beginning of Led Zeppelin because some of the songs like had a very early version of Dazed and Confused. It
Mhm.
had Drinking Muddy Water. It was an interesting sort of history lesson. Um, my favorite guitar player of all time is actually his old very brief bandmate, Jeff Beck. Yeah.
Yeah, you'd mentioned that, and um, yeah, uh, I was surprised to hear that when you mentioned that. I think it was a few episodes ago. You had mentioned how much of a fan you were of Jeff Beck, which surprised me. I'd never heard you mention Jeff Beck even.
And it's funny because he's put out what I don't know 25, 30 albums, and there's only really three or four that are to me essential Jeff Beck albums. But the ones I love, Truth, Beckola, Blow by Blow, are
Mhm.
incredible albums. And his playing is like no one else's in that regard. The sounds he makes on on Truth are just crazy, and I really like that. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, and it's funny because like then you were saying like you've got 20 Herb Alpert albums. If I had
Yeah.
20 Herb Alpert albums, that would mean I love Herb Alpert to death. And you've probably just picked him up because like it was inexpensive, it was a good find, and
They they were ubiquitous in thrift stores in the
yeah,
late
okay,
90s,
yeah,
and still are to a degree to
yeah,
this day. And when I would find a Herb Alpert record in mint condition for 99 cents,
yeah,
I just couldn't stop myself because I do like those records. Am
yeah, no, yeah,
I pulling them out every day to listen to them? No,
yeah,
but every once in a while, and they've got a good vibe to them. I got to say, they're I don't know if I guess they're just they capture the zeitgeist of that era, that mid '60s,
yeah.
for rock and hard rock took over music. It was, Spanish Flea. Who doesn't
Yeah.
love that?
Yeah, now, as I said, my dad liked him, so I remember like listening to Tijuana Taxi all the time as a kid. And
Sure.
I think I was the only kid in my school who knew who Herb Alpert was. um, but it just sort of funny because when I was collecting records, if I had a lot of records by a certain artist or band, it means I either A, loved them, or B, had to complete, being like a comic book collector and all, had to complete the thing. So I had
I don't
every,
know what you're talking about,
yeah.
dude.
So at one point I had every Procol Harum record just because I had five of them and I was like, God, I got to get the other three or whatever it was. And so I could have every one. So if I had 20 Herb Alpert albums, I would actually probably end up with 40. I don't know how many he released, because I'd have to just keep going. So
And when I was younger, that would have been exactly the case for me too. I wouldn't have had 20 Herb Alpert records or 20 records by the Baja Marimba Band, who were A&M label mates of Herb Alpert. It's more of a being older and having bought records for almost 50 years now. Um, I just buy way too many records, so it doesn't mean that having 20 of those records by Herb Alpert means he's one of my favorites, because he's not.
which for
It's really
anyone
just,
else it would, of course. So
yeah, and a product of spending too much time in record stores and thrift stores and what have you.
is there any artist or band who is in rotation way more often than much more often than anyone else in your collection?
Um, right now, boy,
Or the last, just in general.
yeah, I would say over the last couple years or so. And I know you know this because I played her a lot when you were at my place
Yes.
in Seattle. Is Lana Del Rey.
Okay. Yep.
She was a bit of a late discovery for me. I always dismissed her and lumped her in that category of somewhat vacuous, vapid pop music with like Taylor Swift or Beyonce or stuff like that. Charlie XCX, And once I actually listened to a couple of her records, it rapidly changed my opinion about her, and she's one of my, if not the favorite contemporary artists these days.
That's interesting. It's funny because sometimes I'll hear a song and like on the radio or on Spotify or whatever, and I might really like it. And then I go and like check out the rest of the artist stuff. And I'm like, okay, I love that one song, but man, do I dislike their stuff. So Florence and the Machine, for example,
Mhm.
they have a song called Ship to Wreck, which I love. I just think the song is fantastic. And so I saw them on Austin City Limits. Oh my God, they're terrible.
Is that
And
right?
yeah, and so then I was like, okay, well maybe that's live. And so I listened to a couple more songs just on Spotify or Pandora or whatever I was listening to. And again, I just didn't like anything. And it's just interesting that an artist or band can come up with like a song that I mean I don't like, I love, and yet the rest of their stuff I hate.
What was the song that you
It's called
love so much?
Ship to Wreck.
Uh-huh.
Did,
And
did
and
we drink
it's
too much? Were we losing touch? Did we build this ship to wreck?
right. And that's literally the only song you like by
Yeah,
her that you've heard.
yeah. And
Huh.
when them on Austin City Limits, she's so annoying. Like the way she dances and moves, and like I was like, I really dislike this person, and so it's just funny that can happen. And I don't know the rest of Rupert Holmes' music. I'm sure I wouldn't like it, but for whatever reason, I really like him.
Him,
As
him,
as
him.
you know. And now part of it is I find it comical, but part of it is I like it.
Sure, sure. There's a lot of guilty pleasures out there,
and it's just funny,
especially from that era.
Yeah, oh, definitely. And my guilty pleasures, especially from that era, are not bands; they're songs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it, almost exclusively. They're always songs. They're like I like The Night Chicago Died, for example, by Paper Lace. Would I have ever had albums by them? No.
Okay. Don't ask me that question.
Okay.
I do have the record with that.
With that one.
So, yeah, I think that's the only Paper Lace LP I own. I'm embarrassed to say.
And how many Henry Gross albums do you have?
At least two. Oh, God. Speaking of one-hit wonders and guilty pleasures, his song Shannon. You know that song?
Yes, that's why I brought him up.
Have we talked about that?
Yeah.
Oh man, that song, I swear, almost brings tears to my eye. And
how do you think I feel? It's about his dog.
Yeah. Shannon is heading out to sea or whatever.
Drifting out to sea.
Drifting out to sea. It's his dog dying. And but it's such it. I mean, God, that epitomizes sappy shit. But it's so fucking effective.
When I was a kid living in San Diego, my favorite song, and I think I bought the single at like 8 years old or whatever, was "Seasons in the Sun."
Oh, Terry
Jacks. Yep.
Yeah, that fits firmly in that same
it's
category.
The same thing. Yeah.
Billy, Don't Be a Hero.
Yep, there was another one. Yeah.
And they're the sweet spot for that sort of thing seems to be early to mid 70s.
Yeah.
Magic by Pilot, another one.
Yep.
I mean,
Sky High by Jigsaw.
And and I have that record too. And much like you were saying about Florence and the Machine, the rest of the records of these that we've just talked about, usually not much to write home about.
No, and actually there were a lot of 60s bands like that. I don't know if you've ever heard of a band called the Five Americans. Their one hit was called Western Union. Which is great, and it's just so perfect, like pop song, or 98.6 by Keith. These are all just one-offs. If you bought their albums, I'm sure they'd be terrible.
90. I have that record.
Do you have that?
Yes, I do.
And and the record must be terrible, but that song's great.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It is. It's awful, and it's one of those things that I came across either at a record show or a thrift store for $1 or $2, and sure, I'll try that. That's part of the fun about record collecting is taking chances on things that you haven't heard of or you haven't heard or whatever. It's a blast, and it's a great way to discover music that's new to you.
And that's the thing though about you and I and our relationship, our friendship, because even I know you used to have a sort of Tuesday night music night back in outside Seattle with your buddies. How many, and they were hardcore music fans, correct?
A lot of them, most of them.
How many of them would know 98.6?
0.
Yeah, that's my point. Okay. Yeah. And they're hardcore music fans. And even then, and that's the difference. That's why you and I are doing this podcast. Because
that's a good point. And that kind of epitomizes why it's fun for us to do these chats, for sure.
Because again, I if you ask the next 100 people you meet, one, maybe one will know it,
takes a very special breed of nerd to know 98.6 by Keith.
as opposed to Magic by Pilot. Where people are going to know that.
In fact, that was so well known. My ex and I used to when we'd tool around in the car with her son, my stepson, we would have the 70s channel on, which was a Sirius satellite radio channel, which played all the kind of shit we're talking about. And that was Magic was a favorite of my stepson at the time. He would sing it. He would hear it and just
when you're a kid,
latch onto it. And he was like, I don't know, 10 or something. So it's pretty universal.
That is just made. That's Hook City. But whereas for me, I also remember again another one-off, but it was sort of a step up. Okay, Rock On by David Essex.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, this song, this is fucking cool.
And
I still like that a lot.
That is such a great tune.
Yeah.
And sticking to what we're talking about, the rest of the record kind of sucks, I
Yeah.
gotta say. And
It's amazing.
you would think maybe like because that song was really pretty unique,
Oh yeah.
especially to be a big pop hit
Yeah.
like that. I mean, it was huge on this side of the ocean and in Europe and
Yeah.
UK.
He did
But
movies after that.
oh,
So
totally.
yeah.
He was in a movie called Stardust.
Yep. And
Have you seen that?
yeah, and it's two movies. That'll Be the Day
That'll Be the Day,
and
which also had
Stardust.
Ringo and Keith Moon in
Yes.
it.
Yeah.
And That'll Be the Day was so it's a fictionalized story of a rock and roller, and That'll Be the Day is that that person who played by David Essex
Yeah.
in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
And then Stardust is like the sequel that takes place in the 70s when
Right.
he
Yep.
becomes a Bowie-esque type
Yeah.
of rock star and and it goes through all the excess that comes with being a early 70s rock star. It's kind of a cool movie, actually. I
Yeah.
remember seeing that like originally on HBO in like 1975, and it's pretty adult oriented, and I was probably 10 at the time, and it kind of blew my mind. And it's one of those movies that it's hard to find. Like, I don't know if you could stream it or whatever, but I have it on DVD.
Yeah, it is hard to find. But yeah, and I liked it, and I liked both movies. And like I said, I really liked Rock On. But does it surprise me in the least that his records weren't any good? No, there's just something odd about that, you know. Um, and it's just interesting that like you can find the perfect formula for that one song, and then
Which some one-hit wonders, when they're somewhat mocked for being one-hit wonders, they will often say, well, at least I had one hit, you had
yeah.
zero.
Yeah.
And oftentimes that can make enough, back in the day anyway, when records were selling millions, it could set them up financially for the rest of their life. You know,
Yeah.
that's nothing to sneeze at.
Even like one of the dumbest songs ever. There's no way, like even your neighbors don't know 8675309.
Oh, Tommy Two-Tone.
Yeah, like
Uh,
it's amazing.
That one I think was mainstream enough that people know the song, but I bet most people would know Tommy
Oh
Two-Tone.
no, they wouldn't know that, but they would know the song.
Yeah.
So.
Another great example of that sort of thing, especially the financial aspect of it. I've heard Norman Greenbaum talk about Spirit in the
Spirit in the
Sky.
Sky.
I've heard him on, this is probably back in the 90s, heard him on Stern talking about that song. And his band was basically a jug band. That's what they were. They're a jug band, if you know what I mean by a jug band. Mungo Jerry was another band that you would consider a jug band.
In the Summertime, such a great song. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, we could go on and on about those. But anyway, Norman Greenbaum was talking about how, because he didn't have any sniff of success after that song.
Nope.
And it was a huge hit at the time. I think it was 71, maybe 72. But what really kept the cash pouring in is it was featured in movie after movie after movie. And this was 30 years ago he's talking about it. And I'm sure it's been in 30 more movies since then.
Yeah.
And he really never had to work again just because of that one song.
And that was one of the reasons I had you watch, and I know you didn't like the movie, but I had you watch the movie About a Boy, because he doesn't work. Hugh Grant, his character, he doesn't have a job because his father wrote a classic Christmas song that just gets played so often that he's just living off the residuals of it, and just trying to figure out how to block off his time because he has nothing to do. He doesn't have to work.
I appreciated that aspect of the story, but it was just sort of pablum.
Yeah, I know it didn't work for you. So, but it is interesting, like, in that you could have that if you have that one song, I'm sure now, I think he's dead now, but Doug Fieger, the guy who wrote My Sharona, I mean, like, that was in a ton of movies and TV shows and and stuff like that. So if you just write that one catchy number, as a matter of fact, there's a band here very like a country western band called the Wagoneers, who I actually like quite a bit, but like they play in small places, no one goes. They charge like, $5 if there's any even cover. But
Mhm.
the lead singer, Monty Warden, and the lead songwriter, wrote one song called Desperately, which
Mhm.
what's his name, huge country artist, the guy who wrote, George Strait covered it, and it went to number one for George Strait. And so the band's just been living off the money of that,
Sure.
and that was years ago.
Sure. Back
And
when
still,
records sold
yeah,
millions.
yeah. And so it wasn't even there. Like they didn't even record. I mean, they did record it, but it wasn't even a hit for them. But the fact that it was a hit for George Strait made like that was smooth sailing for them.
There was a there was a guy who used to be in this band who one of my bands used to play with back in the San Francisco days. And in fact, the lead singer of this band went on to start he was the founder of Counting Crows, who obviously became really successful. And the singer of that band, Adam, uh,
Derwitz.
yeah, was in this band called Himalayans with uh, I forget the guitarist's name, but anyway, the guitarist was good friends with Michelle before I even knew her, and he was credited as co-writer on a couple songs that were Himalayan songs originally, but ended up being on the first Counting Crows record.
Yep.
And I heard through the grapevine that he was pretty much set financially for a long time
That's
because he
crazy.
was,
Yeah.
he had a couple co-writing credits
Mm.
on a couple of those songs on that record, which probably went on to sell 10 million or something.
As an aside, there's not many voices I hate more than Adam Derwitz's. God, do I hate his singing. I couldn't stand Counting Crows.
Yeah,
But
I won't. I will refrain from commenting. Um, he was a nice guy, I will say that. His band used to open. This is the classic story. His band used to open for mine. We'd play in these places in Berkeley and San Francisco, and
yeah,
there was this camaraderie amongst all the local bands at that
makes
time,
sense. Yeah,
and he was actually a super friendly dude. And the main guitarist, songwriter, and Counting Crows produced and recorded our first uh, demo tape
oh,
back in
there you
those
go. Okay.
days. So we were very connected with them, and I remember the last time we played with them was after they were signed and they were getting a big push and everything. And he was saying to us like, "Oh, you guys are next. You guys are next." And obviously, it wasn't to be.
Do you ever
But
call him up and say, we're still waiting? It's funny about bands being closed, or just bands in general, because some of you and I have talked about. When we were talking about Jane's Addiction a few shows ago, I when was looking him up on Wikipedia, and they were talking about how Perry Farrell insisted on writing credits and production credits and all, to the point where like he was going to break up the band, and so he ended up getting 62.5% of all the credit, and the
Yep,
rest of the band had to split the rest.
they got
Okay.
like 12%.
Yeah, and so there was just a show. They just did a show at Fenway Park because they've released an album. They're doing, yet another reunion tour. And Perry Farrell went after Dave Navarro on stage and he had to be separated and dragged off the stage, and the show ended early. And it's like, man, all these years later, and they still can't fucking get along.
So of course I know all about it, and I
Yeah.
watched the video
Okay.
that they linked in the Boston Globe,
Yeah.
and read through all the comments. You know, comment sections are usually just lots of mean-spirited, ignorant rants, but it was just funny to remember we were talking about Jane's Addiction a
Yeah.
few
Yeah.
episodes ago,
Yeah.
and I was telling you how I had checked out some videos of this reunion
Yep.
tour,
And you said he
and I
sounded terrible.
I
Yeah.
was yeah, I said the band
Yep.
sounded great,
Yep.
but Perry Farrell seemed to have he's forgotten how to sing. I mean, he's up there um, whelping, yelping, whelping like a dog. But anyway, it was just funny to see all the people comment saying the same thing. People who were at that show. But yeah, that's kind of I mean, he's like 65 and he's like he's having a hissy fit on
Yeah.
stage
He's
because at the band from what I read anyway, because the band was drowning out his vocals and it was making him harder. It was making it hard for him to hear himself or sing. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of pathetic, I got to say.
I will say, by the way, speaking of like shows at Fenway Park or at Gillette Stadium where the Patriots play in Massachusetts, um, no matter what I think of someone's music, like Taylor Swift or
Mhm.
or Pink, Pink, who my sister actually went and saw last year because her daughter wanted to go, and
Sure.
so Ruth went with her. I am impressed that the shows that they put on. I will say, because like the Jane's Addiction show had to end early because like they got no fight and they had to be pulled off the stage. And like there was one show at Gillette where it was raining and Taylor Swift like just kept performing like, through the rain and actually just took it to another level to really like, give people their money's worth. I don't like her music at all. I hate it, but I like that. I like that sense of, professionalism and of, wanting to like, really do, give the people their money's worth.
You appreciate the effort.
Yeah. And one thing Springsteen said early when he was still working in Asbury Park, the bars and the shore, he said, he said, I don't have a great voice. He said, so what I've got to do is I've got to have a strong voice, like,
Mhm.
because it's not the perfect voice. So I've got to have a strong voice and a voice that can last so I can play for a long time and,
Mhm.
and people can, again, get their money's worth. And as we know, his shows are legendary. He's 75 and he puts on 3 hour shows, you know?
It's impressive.
Yep.
There's no doubt about it. I want to go back to the
Please.
Knack,
Yep.
Doug Fieger.
Yep.
Um,
I love the Knack when their album came out. Man, I played
sure,
that all the time. So
sure. It kind of holds up too.
yeah.
Good, like
Power
uh,
pop. Yeah.
power pop. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. That Get the Knack record is undeniably catchy
Yeah.
for that sort of thing. He was in. Do you know his early band? He was signed to a major label
Yeah.
in the early '70s and put
What
out a couple of records.
was it called? Flag?
No,
Okay.
it was they were called Sailor.
Sailor. Okay.
And
I knew it was something along those lines because yeah, I had read that.
and I gotta say, I have I think they put out two records and I have them. And in much the same way that Big Star was this unheard of or unheralded band who
Yeah.
was discovered 20 years later after they broke up and what have you, those two Sailor records are shockingly good in a Big Star sort of way, just like really good hard power pop from the early '70s. And if you ever get a chance to check them out, I recommend it. They're surprisingly good and
And
they're really well produced and well recorded, so they
what made you
sound
pick them
really
up in the
good.
first place?
Just
Did you
I
know?
just
Did you know the like?
Yeah, I
Okay.
I had heard about or
Okay.
read somewhere that that was his first band,
Got it.
and you know go try and find a Sailor record. It's pretty tough to do, but I came across them like in again I think in a record show or something, and they were cheap and shockingly good.
Huh,
You
I
know,
will check it out.
like way better than the Knack in my opinion,
Huh.
and
Okay.
I
I'll be
like the
curious.
Knack.
Yeah, and so now, like, I got that record, The Knack, when I was either freshman or sophomore in high school.
Sure.
And so, like, and you're never more open to music in your life than when you're a freshman in high school, basically.
Yeah.
And so, like, I don't think an album could surpass it, just because of that history. But I'll definitely check it out. And this is once again the whole thing of why I like streaming, even though I've got issues with it too. But I can go listen to that as soon as we're done.
Hmm.
Probably. Not 100%, but probably, and that's pretty
Yeah, I
amazing.
let me know if you could find Sailor on
Yeah,
any of the streaming services, because
yeah,
if anything isn't available, it's going to be something like Sailor.
right. Yeah, and once in a while, like that does happen, but not. You'd think it would happen a lot more than it does. It doesn't happen. It's just crazy.
They
And
pretty much get anything and everything up
yeah.
on those services, I imagine.
Now I've never asked him to play the Rolling Stones "Cocksucker Blues," but I wouldn't be shocked, if they had it. So
If it was a formal release, but I don't think that was ever formally released.
yeah, I had it on a bootleg.
Yeah.
The Stones released that to get out of their contract, and it worked. Yeah. So next band you're in, always keep that in the back of your mind if you ever want to get out of your record contract. So, um, but and that was not a one hit wonder.
The Stones.
The Cocksucker Blues. Yeah.
Have
So
you seen that movie by
yeah,
chance?
yeah, we talked about that. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay. I couldn't remember if we did or not.
the Robert Frank movie. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but I still haven't seen, I can't believe it. I still haven't seen, and definitely gonna see it this week, is the movie I recommended to you of their like 73 live set on Apple. And then you saw, and I still haven't seen yet. So I have to see that. So,
You mean the 71
or
Marquee Club
71.
one?
Yeah, 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 that one.
Oh,
Yep.
you haven't watched that yet?
No. So
Oh, okay.
just for whatever reason. So that will happen. So,
My friend Pat, who always tunes into our little chats, I guess he was the one who texted me saying he watched it and liked it.
I had emailed it to you as well. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
that's how it got on my radar
Got it. Yeah. So
was through you. And um, I just love how and I know we've talked about it already, but that era of the Stones is really hard to beat. That
you
late
think better
60s.
than today? Better than now?
Yeah. And they just they look they look there's just such a they look like such degenerates at that time. All of them, like even Charlie and Bill, and they're just like sleazy looking and like they don't give a shit. And but they're playing such great songs, and they look like they're hardly even trying. And like Keith looks like he's about ready to nod off,
Oh, totally.
and then Mick is dancing around like this really just like kind of a fucking asshole really but it all works and there's something so compelling about it.
It's just it's like the perfect description of a rock and roll band. Did you see the documentary? I think it's 3 episodes. I can't remember. For making of Exile.
No,
Oh,
no.
okay. So you got to see that. I'll find that for you. Okay,
Yeah,
because
I
yeah, and Graham
wasn't aware of
Parsons
it.
is in it and all because because he was hanging out with the Stones at that point and all. Yeah,
I
and
read the
so
book called
um,
I think it's called A Season in Hell, The Making of Exile on Main Street. It's a pretty decent book, and I
and
imagine this probably mirrors that, you know.
yeah, and I haven't read that book, but I'm sure it does. And again, you're talking about like looking to generate because it's like it's footage from then at Keith's place, Nelcote in France, and they're on like different floors and like just hanging out, and it's a lot. It's like you saw it Get Back, the Beatles thing. It's not that good in terms of the clarity of the footage and all, but it's that sort of cool footage.
How the hell did that escape my radar? I've never
Yeah,
even heard
I
of
don't know.
that.
It came out. Actually, I always say like 2 or 3 years ago, and then when I look, it's like eight
It's like
years ago.
eight, yeah, no doubt.
So I can't say when it came out, but it was a few years ago, and but I'll find that for you. So
Please do. I'll look for it too.
okay, yeah,
So circling back to we had talked about how the model has changed in the music industry, and for artists to get recognized or to get any sort of mainstream success, to really the one way to do it is on their own via a grassroots movement via the internet. And we were trying to think of some success stories from following that path as
yeah,
opposed to an A&R guy checking you out, A&R guy from a label and getting signed and getting the big push. So and we were talking about Lana Del Rey earlier.
yeah.
That's exactly what she did. I don't know if you know her story, but she totally did it on her own. She self-produced, put together um, a song and a video and threw it up on the internet, and it was that song Video Games. That was her first big hit, and people just loved it, and it literally got her on the map and got her a label contract, and totally from what I understand, totally did it on her own, like even like edited the video, put it together and edited it herself. And it's a pretty amazing success story because now she plays in Boston. She plays that fucking stadium that you were just
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah,
Uh,
no, that is amazing. And so in that first song, because I don't know it, is it just her and guitar, or is there a
no,
band?
no, there's backing.
Okay.
There's a band, and I think before that, she was kicking around New York City, um, doing more of a Amy Winehouse thing. Like there's